Today, I want to go through the new Rentalizer that is in AirDNA. So the Rentalizer tool itself, that algorithm that they spit out, we never really knew how they were coming to that number, right? It was just kind of a number that was out there. And then we had to go find comps that were actually comps. And then once I got like some decent comps, then I would use some other tools like B&B Calc, like Price Labs, like Data Revu, just to cross-reference my data. And I still recommend that. You really want to get the most accurate data set as possible and just look at the different data sets that are available to you as well, because Price Labs gets their data from a different place than where AirDNA does. AirDNA primarily does data scraping or calendar scraping from their calendars. And so what they do is they take basically snapshots of people's calendars and their pricing, and then they use their tools and their data scientists to figure out what dates were booked, and then ultimately put together revenue reports for the last 5 years if you're using the advanced tier, or the last, I think, 3 years if you're using the pro tier. So when you first log into AirDNA, this is what it's going to look like. And we use the advanced tier. We've got a kind of a specialized license. So it's going to show a little bit differently if you guys are using it, specifically the advanced insights in the property managers tab here. But for analyzing deal purposes, it's going to look pretty much the same. So up here at the top, you can put in an address. And I actually just make sure you guys can see my screen here. Yes. I actually just analyzed a property that is in New Bern. So it's 4 Harbor Drive in New Bern, North Carolina. And it's a pretty nice property. So it's right on the water. It's got a dock. It's a 3, I believe 2.5. Yep. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to copy this, and I'm going to just throw it up here into the Rentalizer. And you can do a few different things here. You can search markets. Like I've been searching the Oak Island market because I've got a buddy who's buying a property there. Brevard obviously is where I'm at, but I'm going to put in this property here and just look specifically at the Rentalizer right now. So for those of you who have used Airbnb or AirDNA in the past, you'll know that this looks different now. The main things that are going to be different, one is the confidence score here. So I want to call this out. This confidence score is based on the comp set that this algorithm it comes from. So the confidence score is a measure of how precise the projections are. Improve the confidence score by customizing your comp set with listings most similar to yours. So a lot of that is going to have to do with bed bath count, but then also location. And if there's lots of properties that have accurate data in that same location that are that same size property, then the confidence score can be high, I think medium, or low. So we'll see how this changes as we customize our comps. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and edit some of this data. So it's actually 3, 2.5. I think it could probably sleep up to 10. And it's actually going to change here. So the confidence score now moved to medium. And in my opinion, it's because there's not a ton of properties that have 10 guests here. And so looks like AirDNA has already put a comp set together for 5 properties. And so in the past, all we would see at the bottom here is just really like 3 or 4 properties that AirDNA had said, hey, these are properties that are most similar to this subject property, the one that you put in. But now what you can do is you can look on the map and you can customize this comp set. So let's just go ahead and look at some of these comps. So they're all 3 beds. Looks like there's one that's 1.5 bath. And so previously what I would do is I would look at these numbers, and then I would look at the map to see, all right, which properties do I need to come in and put into my Rentalizer here? And so I will blow this back up, but this is my Rentalizer that we use here at SDR Secrets. If you want to copy this, just drop Rentalizer in the comments. But this has a lot of the information that I need, but it's really to analyze a deal property, but it's really where I would put in comps that I would find and help me remember what properties I think are comparable properties. Because the big problem is if we come back to AirDNA here and just look at some of these comps, let's look at this one, for instance. So this one here, the New Bern NC HIP Historic District comp, to me, doesn't look like that great of a property. It's only been bringing in, was it 15K in revenue, only available 225 days a year. Let's just look. Looks like they got it started in 2023. So to me, I'm like, this property, taken with cell phone pictures, only has 15 reviews. I don't know what's going on here on the bed. There's like, I don't even know what that is. It looks like frying pan on the bed. Really dark pictures. Like, to me, this is not really a comp. It's not available all throughout the year, and it's not a comp. So what I do is I try and find, all right, what are the best comps for this subject property? And that was not one. So I want to go to customized comps here, which is something that has not happened up until now, up until this most recent update. So I'm probably going to remove that one as a comp, because what this is doing is it's actually dragging the algorithm down in occupancy. So in this case, it's 52% occupancy. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that one. And then I'm going to look for other available comps. And the nice thing here is you can filter some of the available comps. So I'm going to look at properties that are just, sleeping really, I would say 6 to 10 bedrooms. The other nice thing about this property is it is on the water. So I can try and find some other properties that are on the water. I'm going to look at entire place. I'm going to apply. I'm not going to worry too much about performance here, because there's not a huge amount of properties here in New Bern. But you can filter to host unit count. You can filter to days available, which I recommend as well. So you want to use comps that have been available for a significant amount of time to make sure that they are true comps. And you can also use amenity filters too, if you do have the advanced license. So next step really is finding some of these available comps. So it looks like there's really only two. There's this one that's doing 113,000. So they're 461 in ADR, 71% occupancy. It's a 2.5, so it sleeps 12. So to me, I'm like, all right, maybe if I sleep a little bit more, I could do a little bit better, like this property. But I want to make sure first that this is a decent property and it would be a decent comp. So the first thing that sticks out to me is, hey, this property's on the water. So that's a good thing, right? It looks like it's got a new updated dock here. The pictures still aren't great, but they have a lot of pictures. They've got the string lights in the back. Again, it's right on the water. You get nice sunsets. They've got this nice dock here, which is interesting because this picture looks like the dock's no longer there, and then this one it is. But now looks like they got some games and everything too. They've got a new grill that they put in. So to me, I'm like, all right, this could be really interesting. So this property, I think, is probably the best comp here. Let me make sure they got reviews and recent reviews as well. The one thing that stood out to me when I first looked at this comp is there's no availability for the entire summer. So that's interesting to me. If I'm somebody who's looking at buying this property, I'm probably reaching out to this host and saying, hey, are you available in June or July, or is your calendar just blocked? Has somebody booked it? But they have recent reviews here for people staying here. So to me, I'm like, all right, this is probably one of the best comps. And now what I can do is add that to my comp set, and then I can update the report. So when I press update the report, it comes back and my projected revenue is a lot higher because I have more accurate comps that are doing higher in revenue, and I got rid of some of the comps that weren't doing as well. So those are really the two main updates. Is one, you get this confidence score now, but then two, you also get to customize your comps, which will also customize and use AirDNA's, really well done algorithm to update more proportionately with what the actual earnings would be for this property. So, and also if I'm an investor, and I'm looking at this, I'm probably trying to become as much like this property as possible. That is getting those, let's see here. Yeah, those 461 a night and then 71% occupancy. Like, that's really what I'm shooting for. So if I'm an investor, and I'll actually pull up another sheet here. Let me pull, this was the analysis I was going through. Make sure you guys can see this. So in this case, I put an analysis together for the guy who called me about what the cash flow would look like if I managed the property and if he bought it. Right. And I said kind of the best case he could do, just based on everything that I'm seeing, the best case, and I gave him a very conservative best case was 82,000 because it is a smaller property and it's not as close to downtown. Right. So, but if this property could bring in that 471 a night, whoops, I need to update and make sure I can edit it. Uh, Here we go. That 471 a night, then it's looking like a heck of a lot better deal. If he can do six figures on this property, which maybe, then it's looking like a break even deal for him. So that's kind of the big thing that AirDNA has released. Now, one thing I think that they're going to improve in the future, if I go back to AirDNA here, is they've got the financial calculator here, which I think does a decent job of some of the costs and some of the startup costs. If you guys are familiar with B&B Calc, one of my buddies, Jeremy Worden, created that, which is essentially taking AirDNA's Rentalizer and then the spreadsheet that I showed you guys, combining all that in one in a nice, easy to use type of platform. Highly recommend B&B Calc as another data source with AirDNA as well. So I always recommend use AirDNA, use B&B Calc, and then Price Labs is another one to just cross-reference some of these comps and cross-reference some of these revenue numbers because they all kind of get different. They get their revenue and their numbers in different places, right? So you can use this financial calculator if you want. And then the other thing you can do is you can save these reports. So instead of, using your deal analyzer or your spreadsheet, you can actually save this report in the future, and then you can also download these reports too. So those are two pretty major, or really three pretty major updates that AirDNA has made. And really, why this is important is one, you get more accurate assessments, but then two, you can also share these assessments with potential buyers. So if there's somebody that comes to you and says, "Hey, can you give me a revenue estimate?" You can now use AirDNA to download these reports and send it to them. I always recommend sending it to them with the spreadsheet as well. That's exactly what I did 20 minutes ago when I was talking to Matt, the guy who was looking at this house in New Bern. I said, here's the spreadsheet, here's my analysis, here's my worst case, target, and then best case. And then also here's the comps that go with it. And so when you download the report, it spits out some of these comps and what their numbers are. And then he can look at it and say, all right, I'm going to take a little bit deeper dive into some of those comps and then be able to, look through some of their listings and figure out what's good and what's not good about them and make just a better analysis on it. And, guys, I've done underwriting. I've done some where I've overestimated on properties for homeowners, and it's never fun having that conversation, right? I'm always very conservative. 90% of the properties I do estimate, I always beat my projections because again, I am conservative, but also at the end of the day, there's been over 600,000 properties that have been added on Airbnb as short-term rentals in the last 4 years. So it's gotten a heck of a lot more competitive. And now I tell every single person that comes to me that says, "Hey, I want to buy a property," or "Hey, can you manage this property for me?" I tell them, do not wait to amenitize and design your property. You're not going to make any money if you just decide, "Hey, I want to get it up and running and make some money." In year one, and then in year two, I'll do some upgrades. It never works. It just doesn't in this economy right now. People are not going to be booking those homes, and you're not going to be doing well. And if they say that, if the homeowner says that, or somebody that comes to you and says that, I would give them, really the 50th percentile at best for their property. No matter what AirDNA says on what this Rentalizer is, you got to put together real comps of properties that don't have great amenities and then put that projection together for them. Do not use, if they're not going to really amenitize it, put in the game room, put in the fire pit like this property had that I showed here a little bit earlier that's on the water, then give them properties that aren't on the water, that don't have amenities, that did 15K, like that first one I showed you guys. So you have to be conservative, but also use all the data possible and create good comp sets based on the future outlook of the property. So what amenities that they have, what that location is, and then give them an estimate too on how much those things would cost to invest in. Right. If you're looking at a sauna, you're looking at between 5 and 10 grand. If you're looking at a hot tub, same thing. It's probably like 5 to 8 to 10,000 dollars for a hot tub. String lights, stuff like that, pretty cheap. Do not skimp on the photos either. Those are something that, if for a big house, I just paid, I think it was like 2,500 to Andrew Keller for photos, which most of you guys are like, oh, wow. Well, this place is calling for $1,800 a night, right? So it's like, all right, that's 1.5 nights of revenue just for these awesome, awesome photos. So shout out to Andrew Keller too. Those came out amazing, and we're crushing it this summer. So yeah, and Sarah asked a good question. So, what if confidence score is low and it's only pulling up 3 comps? You really have to look at and see, all right, are these 3 comps actual comps? And if they're not, what you can do is you can come into, the customization of it. And then what I always recommend is backing out of resetting these. And you know what? I'll just look at your property for you. So 8510 bobsled trail, and that's in Morrison, Colorado here. Sarah, let me know what it's, one bed, one bath, sleeps two, but it looks like this place is probably out in the middle of nowhere. But what you do is you go to customize comps and then find some other comps that are in here. So it spits out 3 here, but it looks like there are some other available comps. If it is a 1-1, it looks like there's not a lot of 1-1s. Looks like there's maybe one more here that is closer to Red Rocks, and you could add that in there. And then if like the available comps just in this area doesn't work, what I typically recommend is just look at some other areas that are similar. So what are some other areas that are similar in feature set? Unsure on the Bed Baths until my call with them. So look at some other areas that are similar in feature set. So if this is all stuff that's close to Red Rocks, well, are there any other concert venues? I mean, Red Rocks is one in, a million. I understand it's amazing there. I've been there twice. But are there any other markets that have a Red Rocks type of feel? I know there's like the Gorge in Washington. There's where Bonnaroo is, like Manchester, Tennessee. Looking at some of those markets and just seeing what's the demand. They obviously have lots of concerts coming in and out. What's the demand for 1-1s in those areas? And what type of amenities do they have? What type of reviews do they have? And try and find some comps that are out there, even if it's not in the same state. You can find similar types of properties. It's all about that experience that you're going for. And if they have properties in Manchester and the Gorge in Washington that are doing really well, even if they're out in the middle of nowhere, you can still use those as comps. You just got to let the client know that, hey, it's not in this area, but it's in a similar area in the country, and you could get numbers like these. So I hope that helps. Let's see here. So Luis said, until AirDNA's comp set factors amenities, views, and allows you to match to the owner percentile you anticipate you'd fall into, it's too unreliable. And I the last statement is too unreliable. I would disagree with you on that, but I think everything else that you said is applicable, right? You need to be able to factor in all of those things and then put together an assessment for yourself and for your homeowner. So what I mentioned earlier too is you never use the projected revenue here in the occupancy and ADR. You're never really going to use that for a homeowner. And one of the things that I emailed Jamie about too was actually when you're updating the estimate, I would love to be able to update this, and then when I export or download the PDF, be able to, so in this, when you're updating the financial calculator, being able to actually update the rental revenue and the occupancy and the ADR. That is one thing in B&B Calc that I really do like. that you can actually create your own assumptions and your best case or your worst case or your target, based on the comp sense and based on what you feel it can do. And like I said earlier, there's houses that are not on the water that I included in the comp set. But if you're looking at beach markets, the difference between a beachfront property and a non-beachfront property is is extremely, extremely different. I mean, you can be looking at 80% difference on those properties, right? So being able to filter for that, I agree with you, Luis. I think that's a big factor. But at the end of the day, you will never use just AirDNA's algorithm, right? I think people got in trouble for that over the past few years where they bought bad deals just based off this because they didn't go the extra steps, which is what I recommend to everybody. We got to go the extra steps. And that's what I love about what AirDNA's done. Like their extra step is creating the custom comps, right? And creating the custom comps helps that algorithm, but still you got to go, like I said, that extra 5% is a big 5% to put together your estimates on, based on what's beachfront, what's not. And then at the end of the day, if there's one comp that is in the same location or similar location to the property that I'm looking at, like the one I showed earlier that was doing 116,000, that gives me a heck of a lot more confidence because I know that I operate in the top 1%. And so if I can furnish that property the right way that beats that property that's doing well, and then I can operate it like I know I can operate it, I know I'm going to beat the revenue numbers that that person has just by designing it and by managing it better than them. But I mentioned this earlier, it has to start with the design and the amenities and one good comp that has good data. And so people often ask me, how do I know if it's good data or not? There's a few different things. If I come back to AirDNA here, and I'll see if I can find a property that doesn't have that great of data. So like these properties that have 231 reviews, 114 reviews, I think those are good. Properties that I don't think are good data. Let's look at this property for instance. So Mountain Mansion, this one actually looks 230 days available. So it's only been on the market since September of last year. So to me, I'm like, all right, this is probably not that reliable of data because they haven't been running long enough. And so what I like to do is I like to go 5 years back. And again, this property's only been available since September of last year. So I'm like, all right, we don't know how well this property is going to do throughout the entire year or the past years, right? So to me, I'm like, all right, it's not the best data. The other thing too that you got to look out for with AirDNA, and Jamie, if you're still on here, you can help shed light on this, is if you're in a beach market, a lot of the times in these beach markets, like in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, there's 30 minutes from me. There's three big property managers, like massive property managers that have 90% of the market share. And what they typically do is they have email lists that have tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people that have stayed with them over the last 10, 20 years. And what they do is they will have a base price for their direct site, and then they will increase the Airbnb and the Verbo prices by anywhere from like 8 to 12% is what I've seen. And so when I'm looking at comps and I see that it's managed by a big property manager, I typically take I usually take about 10% off of the revenue because I know that what so the way that AirDNA gets their data is they scrape the calendars from Airbnb and from Verbo as well, mainly from Airbnb. And so if the subject property that we're looking at or the comp has 12% higher prices on Airbnb and they get booked, Airbnb thinks, "Hey, I think that's what they got booked for." Even though on their direct site, they got booked for less, right? They got booked for 10%, 12% less. So those numbers, when they're managed by big, big property managers, can be inflated. And from what I've seen, has thrown off a lot of people on analyzing deals, right? So that's what one of the things I always look at is like, all right, if it's in a beach market or if it's in a, like a Lake Tahoe type of market, we have to look at who's it managed by. And if it's managed by a self-host, somebody that's got one property or maybe less than 20 properties, um, really that like boutique co-host, those are the ones that when they have really good pictures, they've got really good amenities, then I know, all right, I've got a lot more confidence in that being a comp versus, one that's managed by a very large property manager. So appreciate everybody. I hope this was helpful. If you want access to our deal analyzer, that is just a simple spreadsheet, just comment Rentalizer and I will send you our version of it, which is just, again, it's a simple spreadsheet that I use in combination with AirDNA's Rentalizer. I appreciate everybody. Have a great rest of the week and I will see you guys next week. Take care.